Hey my friends, Matt from Renclif Media here. Today I'll be reviewing Dehancer, which is a film effects and color grading plugin for Davinci Resolve. The plugin is based on 30 years of film shooting and developing experience, and it contains over 58 photo and movie film stocks, as well as other powerful film emulation effects. Some of the main features include realistic film grain, halation, blooming, color density, and exposure controls, and a whole lot of other features. It also has features like creating vignettes, false color, and even Lut Generation to help you speed up your color grading workflow. Now let's jump into Davinci Resolve Studio 17 and take a look at how to use some of the key features of Dehancer, and I'll be using the Pro version for this demonstration. Hey guys, I'm here in Davinci Resolve Studio 17 and I already have the color page open with my first clip selected. Now my usual workflow is that I shoot most of the time in 6K B-roll with my Blackmagic Pocket 6K. And I also like to shoot with vintage prime lenses. I have a whole set of contact Zeiss lenses, and that gets me the initial vintage film look in camera. Now this footage was initially shot with my Blackmagic Pocket 6K and B-roll, but I have converted it to ProRes 422 4K, just because I found that playing back 6K B-roll, even on a 4K timeline, with the Dehancer effects applied plus all the grades, it can play back quite slowly. Probably to do mostly with my computer. I'm only editing on an M1 MacBook Air. So my usual workflow is that I have all my power grades here on the left, and I have everything ready to go with my grades just to speed things up. And depending on what I'm editing, I have a grade for each particular clip that I want to edit. So for this particular clip, it's just 422. So I'm just going to use this natural ProRes 422. I'm going to click apply grade. And for the purpose of creating a bit more space, make things easy, I'm just going to close this, drag this across. Now this is the way I set up my node tree. Everyone's different with how they do it. I like to have my noise reduction as my first node. I have that toggled off because playing back with noise reduction isn't real smooth on my computer. Next I have my primary grade, my LUT, my secondary grade, and some parallel nodes, which are my HDR, my outer vignette, and my inner vignette. I'm just going to do a really quick grade on this first. I'm just going to go to my primary grade, I'll go to my curves, and I'll just lift this up a little bit. It's a little bit strong. Next I'll just bring up the exposure a little bit, the offset, because it was slightly underexposed. Like so. Bring up the lift a little bit as well. I'm just going to reduce the color boost and the saturation just to keep that film look. If I hit Command F, you'll see that I've got quite a nice grade to begin with. Now when you apply the Dehancer effect plugin to your grade, it's recommended that you apply it to the final node on your grade. So I'm just going to create a new serial node using Option S. Now the Dehancer effect plugin is under effects, so I'm just going to click on the effects tab up here, and it's usually right down the bottom. So you scroll down the bottom and you'll see Dehancer 5.3. That's the version I'm using. And to make it easier in the future, you can just right click and click add to favorites, and that's what I've done. And all you need to do is just drag it onto your node. So just click and drag, drop it onto your node like so, and you'll see that instantly it's applied effects, film effects to your particular clip. Now beginning with the top, I'm just going to go full screen. You'll just see what it's done to this clip. So I just toggle this node on and off using Command D. And you'll see that it's applying that nice film look with some film grain. Under this panel here, we scroll down, we have all our different tools for grading our footage. And I'm mostly just going to be showing you guys how I use this particular plugin, beginning with your input source. So I've just left this as Rec 709. Because that's the color space I'm working in. But if you wanted to start your grade from scratch, let's say I wanted to start grading my particular footage that I shot with, I'd choose my camera, choose my vendor, Blackmagic Design, choose my camera as Blackmagic 6K, and my format, so Gen 4 or Gen 5 color space. And that's going to allow you to grade your raw footage from the beginning. So you have your exposure adjustments, your temperature, tint, the fringe. So basically all the adjustments you have when you're color grading raw footage. But I like to work with my power grades for my initial grade, so I'm just going to leave this as Rec 709. Now scrolling down, we have our film stocks, and when I click on this little drop down arrow, we have a whole range of different film stocks. I was playing around with the Kodak Vision film stocks previously, so that's what it's set on at the moment. But if we go to the very top, beginning with alphabetical order, starting with A, we have all these different film stocks I've never really heard of. And when we click on a particular stock, it's going to apply that look to the footage. We have all our Fuji film stocks as well, which I'm a big fan of. I do own a Fuji X-T2, which has all the inbuilt film emulations. And I tend to love using things like Eterna, and also Velvia is quite beautiful. And that works really nicely for this particular shot, really brings out the vibrance in the blues. So we have so many different film stocks to choose from, so you're never going to get tired of creating different looks. Now scrolling down, we have our Kodak Vision film stocks as well, which I'm a big fan of. And I believe these are a range of different movie film stocks and also photo film stocks. So we have some from 1979, so that's like a black and white film stock, which is pretty awesome. And I really like the Kodak Vision 250D for this particular shot, looks really nice. And I think also for this particular shot, with all the vibrant blues of the ocean, I think the Fuji film stocks will work really nicely for this as well. So I could go with something like Velvia. We also have our push and pull, which is adjusting the EV exposure. So bringing it down or bringing up the exposure to brighten it. And you can just reset it by clicking on that arrow if you don't like it. We can also toggle this on and off. So going down to our expand, and this is where you can adjust your black point. So you can either lift the blacks. So if I bring down the black point like so, it's making the shadows look flatter. If I bring it up, it's actually adding more contrast to the shadows. So I tend to like it a little bit lifted to keep that nice film look. And we also have our white point, so I can adjust that to brighten the whites, lift the whites in the shot. I can also reset it if I don't like it. Color mode, I've just left it as normal, haven't really played around with Luma. Going down to our print, this is where we can actually change our paper stock. So the types of paper that you print on will also determine the look that you achieve. So I've just left it on linear, I think that's the default. But you've also got things like Cine on Film Log, which is more of a flat look. You've got Kodak 2383 print film. You've also got this Kodak Endura glossy paper. And glossy paper tends to always have more contrast and saturation. So that's pretty awesome. If I want more of a contrast and saturation, I'll go with glossy. And if I want more of a flatter look, I'll just leave it as linear. Now I also have my exposure adjustments, like so. I can adjust my exposure, my paper, tonal contrast. And we also have our saturation. So if you want it to look more black and white or more desaturated, you can bring that down. I just tend to leave it around about 100. I guess I could desaturate that a little bit if I wanted to. And I'm not sure what analog range limiter does. I haven't really played around with that, but it tends to change it a little bit. And moving on to our color head. So if I just toggle this on and off, full screen, you can see that it looks like so. And if I change this to push more yellows into the footage, you can see that it's just pushed some yellow kind of sepia tones into the shadowy areas mostly. So that kind of give you that sepia look if that's what you're going for. And you've also got magenta and green. So if I move that up to green, you'll see that it's looking a lot greener. Move that down to magenta. And you've also got cyan as well. So if I move that right down, it's more of a cyan look. This is more of a red look. So that also helps to emulate different film looks. I'm just going to reset all that. I do like a little bit of yellow actually. Looks pretty cool. Bit of sepia. And I'm not sure what the gang does. Haven't really played around with that. We've also got preserve exposure. So that tends to lift the shadows a bit, I think. And impact. So that's like 0 impact, that's how it looks. And 100 impact. And now moving on to film grain. Now this is where you have a lot of control over the look of your film grain, the size of the grain, you have the amount of grain. By default it's set at size of 1 and amount 20. And I tend to bring this down a bit because you can see when I play this back, it's playing back a little bit slowly. But it's just the grain is a little bit too overpowering at the moment. There's a bit too much grain, especially for daytime. So I'm just going to bring this amount down. So if you use this slider, it's a bit less fine-tuned. But if you use this little arrow, you can kind of fine-tune a bit more. So usually somewhere around between 2 and 3 I find is a nice amount of grain. But it's entirely up to you and the look you want to achieve. Now film resolution is actually preserving the amount of detail in the shot. By default I think it's set on 50 and that's looking pretty good, but if you want to preserve more detail you drag it up to 100. So you'll see that's actually looking sharper. So preserving more detail in the shot. But if you want a softer look, you bring that down. That's actually looking a bit softer now at 0. So I tend to leave it about 50 or maybe a bit higher. You probably go to about 70. That looks pretty good. If you're shooting in 6K, obviously you want to preserve as much detail as possible, or even 4K. But if you do want a bit of a softer look, that's nice to have that adjustment. Now shadows, we can change the amount of film grain in the shadows and also the midtones and the highlights. I tend to leave it as default, but I sometimes bring down the amount of film grain in the midtones, because if you have a shot of someone's skin tones or their face, for instance, you don't want too much grain in there because it can look a little bit overpowering. Now I will just show you guys another clip, continuing with this demonstration. So I'm just going to open this up. And I'm going to go to this clip right here of the ocean. And I'm just going to copy my grade from one to the next. So I'll just go apply grade. And now I've just copied this grade to this clip. Depending on the clip that you're using, the grain may appear more pronounced or it may appear less pronounced. In this particular shot, it's looking quite grainy. So you really have to adjust it depending on the clip that you're grading. So I'm just going to go back to the amount with this clip and I'm just going to tone it down a little bit more. And scrolling down, we also have things like film type. I haven't really played around with that. So at the moment it's on negative, you can change it to positive. I'll just change it back. You've also got different modes, so analog or digital experimental. I just tend to leave it on analog. Next, moving on to our halation. So with halation, I will show you a different clip again, because halation is a film effect which is seen when shooting with film. It's a glowing effect which appears around bright light sources in the form of orange and red halos. And it's especially noticeable in night shots where you have strong light sources. So I'm just going to go to this particular clip here. I'm just going to again copy my grade across. Click apply grade. And I will just tone this down a bit. I'll just do a bit of an adjustment. Just reset this, lift this up a bit. This is just shot in my garage and I have a couple of different light sources. I have this light source here. I have a light in the toolbox, which is shining onto my face. And I also have a light shining down from up here, from the top. So you'll see here there's a light coming down from the top left as well. When I go back to my Dehancer effects here, I'll go back down to halation. And when I enable this, you'll see a slight change in the light source. It's probably not that noticeable at the moment. But what you can do is you can use this mask mode here. So this mask mode will show you what it's actually doing. If I click on mask mode and toggle my full screen, all these highlighted red areas are basically light, and that's the areas that it's affecting the most, I believe, in mask mode. I mean, you have, starting with the top, you have source limiter. You can adjust that. So that's kind of limiting how much it applies, I believe. You have the background gain. I don't really play around with that too much. Smoothness, so I'm guessing that's the the highlight roll off or the smoothness of the effect on the light source. You also got local diffusion, global diffusion. So if I bring up the global diffusion, that's going to increase the intensity as a whole. So if I turn off that mask mode and I just toggle that on and off, you'll see that it's putting this orangey red halo around this light source here. So before and after. So that can be quite realistic. And also you've got things like Amplifier, so that's going to amplify the amount of halation. So if I turn this right down, it's less. I turn it up, it's more. The hue as well, a different color temperature. Blue comp, I'm not really sure what that does. Some sort of compensation. Impact as well, so increasing this impact. If I just go back to my mask mode and I increase that, you can see that's increasing the intensity. So that's like up to the highest amount, and then going back down, that's a lower amount. So this mask mode is really handy because you can isolate the particular area in the shot that it's affecting. So that's just a really interesting effect, and you'll see that it's also doing the same sort of effect around any objects that are red in the scene. So even things like, when I just play this back in, even things like skin tones, things that are painted red or of a red color. And I'll just show you another example. So if I copy this grade to my next clip, click apply grade, you'll see that it's done the same thing here. So if I play this back, you'll see that my face actually looks slightly red in the clip, and this light source here is looking really orangey red. So if I toggle the node on and off, you'll see before and after. And that's really having a really big impact. Even the light on the wall here is actually changed to an orangey reddy color as well. Now that might be a little bit overpowering, and that's when you obviously want to adjust these settings here. So the amount of impact, you might bring that down, and you might also bring down the amplifier as well, and a whole bunch of other settings. So that's pretty much halation. I absolutely love that effect. Now we also have bloom. Now I tend to shoot everything with diffusion filters if I can. So I did shoot this, I believe, with a black pro mist, so it does already have some sort of blooming, and also vintage lenses naturally have blooming as well because of the coatings on the lenses. But having this blooming effect can be really useful to further enhance the blooming in your shot. So when I toggle on this blooming, I'm just going to click enable, and you'll see that it's putting this nice glowy light effect around the light sources, or any reflections as well. So we have this reflection on the toolbox here. You also have full control over the bloom in the highlights. I've just left it as default. Again, you have source limiter, details, diffusion, amplify. You can amplify the blooming. Let's see if I bring that right up. That's really looking glowy right now. Save lights. I'm guessing that's like preserving the detail in the light source. So if I just leaving this at 100, you can see some detail still in this globe. If I bring this down, you'll see that it's just washing out all the detail, and it's just insanely glowy, which looks really interesting. So I will leave the save lights because I like to preserve the detail in the lights. You've also got saturation. So you can lower the saturation in the bloom or bring it up. And again, you've got impact as well. So impact is going to increase the intensity, or I can reduce the intensity like so. So again, a lot of different tools to really have full control over that effect. Now moving on, we've got our vignette effects as well. Now I tend to already apply vignettes in my power grades, but if I wanted to start my grade from scratch, for instance, I could use this vignette. And just adjusting this vignette, I have to enable it, of course. We can adjust the exposure of the vignette. So you'll see that it's darkening the outer edges of the frame. Also adjust the size. So if I want to bring it up or reduce it, we can adjust that. The feathering, so the softness of the vignette around the edge. So at the moment it's 100, which is a nice soft vignette. If we bring this down, it's going to be more of a hard edge. So you definitely don't want to go too low, because then you're going to see the actual vignette in the shot, and you don't want that. Aspect ratio as well, and center, so we can change the offset of the vignette. Now moving on to film breadth. This is almost like bringing the film to life. It's a subtle flickering of the film. It's the effect due to accidental changes in exposure, color, and contrast as the film moves. And this is really interesting because it's just that extra feature that really makes all the difference with making it look more realistic. So when I enable this film breath, you'll see that there's almost like a slight flickering in the light, slight change in exposure, especially in this light source up the top left. And that's that film breath effect. You can also change the period of the film breath. So at the moment it's 3. So I think if you want it to last for longer, you can bring that up. Just play that back again. You can also change the exposure. So if I bring this up, you can change the color, the impact again. So that's quite noticeable now in that light source. Now moving on to Gateweave. Now this is something else. This is the subtle movements of film caused by factors such as unstable camera shutter. So when I toggle this on and off, and I'll just play back this clip, you'll see a slight movement in the clip, almost like a really subtle kind of camera shake, but it's not camera shake, it's actually this Gateweave effect. So it's very, very subtle, but you'll see that your frame is moving slightly, and you'll notice it around the edges. And again, you can increase the period, and you can change the things like translation, X on X-axis and Y-axis, rotation, impact. So it's a bit hard to notice, but it's very subtle. And now we have additional features such as false color. So if I toggle this on, I can toggle false color, and that can be useful for checking your exposure, making sure that it's correct. I tend to use false color when I'm actually filming, so I get my exposure correct in the beginning. But if you did want to check your exposure and make some adjustments, that's really useful to have false color as well. So you can toggle that on and off. And now I've got output. So this is where you can adjust the total impact of the film effect. So that's almost like your key. So very similar to the key. So if at the very end of my adjustments, I want to actually tone it down a little bit, I find it's a little bit too strong, I can go to this total impact and I can just tone it down slightly. Now I've also got Lut Generator. This can generate a LUT. You can change the size of the LUTs to small or normal. You also got this disable input transform. I haven't really used this feature because I have my own LUTs that I begin with my power grade, but this is definitely really useful to have. You've also got options for quality as well. So normal quality for fast, and high quality, which is going to be a bit slower. Well, that's a wrap for this review, guys. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end, and I hope you found this video helpful. I'd also like to thank the Dehancer team for giving me the opportunity to test out their plugin. I really enjoyed using it, and I highly recommend checking it out. I think it's an excellent plugin for recreating the film look. And if you'd like to know more about the plugin and also the film process, you can check out the Dehancer blog. There's some really useful information there as well. And I also have a link in the description below to receive 10% off any of the Dehancer plugins available on their website. Now, if you do decide to use that link, I will receive some commission, and that just goes towards helping me maintain this channel and create more content like this for you guys in the future. I'm really grateful for your support, my friends, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Have an awesome day. Thank you.